on some forum I was reading a long time ago that somebody was arguing that My Little Pony was a pro-white nationalist show. It just goes to show you how far we've fallen. Anyway, this is Common Filth Radio episode 3. Thank you for sending in your questions, your artwork, and just for listening. Last episode had a lot of views, a lot more than I was expecting. The audience grew quite a bit, so thank you, those of you that made that happen. I was talking to a few of you in the Plug DJ room a few days ago about how I was experimenting with different formats of a podcast over the last month and a half, and I would record some stuff in my car on a cheap camera that I have, and the monologue format just doesn't work. I much prefer to answer your questions than talk to myself about whatever I feel like talking about. And apparently, I was talking about gang stalking and traffic lights, the thing that I uploaded briefly that I took down because the sound quality was real bad. The point is that I enjoy talking to you people a lot more than I enjoy talking to myself. I feel like I'm a prisoner of my own madness when I talk to myself too much. So let's get into your questions. For the second consecutive episode, I will answer Jack's question first. And for the second consecutive episode, he drew something for me, which I very much appreciate. The question goes like this: why do you think philosophy and logic are not taught, or at least covered in public school? To me, it seems that the school system just brushes these subjects under the rug, and this causes the majority of the population to be inept in defending their beliefs. They don't want their students questioning the beliefs that are transmitted to them from their teachers, because the teachers, they have a vested interest in the political process. They have a vested interest in doing things a certain way because they're public employees. They want more taxes so that they get more money. Their salaries increase that way. So if if their students were taught to think logically, I think a lot of them would come to that conclusion and see that there is an inherent bias in teaching. A lot of the beliefs you see held by younger people are just a side effect of the process by which they are taught and indoctrinated into whatever the school district and public school system wants them to believe. Because stuff like gay marriage and gender equality are just offshoots of the same thing, which is I want to keep my job, so give me more tax money. If the majority of students were taught how to think things through, you'd see a lot more students turn against them, which is obviously detrimental to their end game, which is more money. Most people are motivated by financial gain and providing for themselves and their families, so the it's less insidious than we think it is, even though the side effects make it seem worse than what it actually is. For example, like when we're arguing with people who've been through the system and we make a point against, say, feminism or something like that, they'll say, it's 2014, how can you believe that? And that's the extent of their argument. And you even see this in people who've graduated from college. And like I was reading recently on some bad book website, library, I'm not going to give names of the book, but they're basically saying that, oh, I got this book and it's so misogynistic, and how can you have these 19th century attitudes towards this? As if there's something inherently wrong with having old ideas or old attitudes. The comments I'm referring to came from this website for librarians, so obviously it's going to skew middle aged and female. And they kept repeating the same thing over and over again. It's the 21st century. It's 2014. How can you believe these things? And it never occurs to them that they're arguing like teenagers and college students, and they're old people, they're older people who should be well beyond this kind of argument. Another thing that never seems to occur to these women on this website is that they might be living examples of why certain people have a negative attitude towards certain aspects of the female psyche. Yes, I know that women don't exclusively use the current year fallacy to prove their point, but it's just a recent example that I encountered of faulty logic being used by everyday people. It seems that debates and dialogues that happen in our culture now have been reduced to either it's the current year, you have an old idea, or gotcha, you're doing something hypocritical, or you're doing something embarrassing. And it's really pathetic. In fact, I would call these things the new racist, in that if somebody calls you a racist, you've won the debate. So if somebody's saying that you have outdated ideas and that's all that they can say about it, or that you're doing something that might be embarrassing or something that reflects badly on you, you're probably doing a better job at convincing people of your point than they are at convincing their point. I had some people recently posting on the timeline of one of my pages, or wall, whatever Facebook calls it now, and they were saying, "Why do your fans hate you?" Which I don't think they do. It's actually quite a small minority of people that, for some reason, like the page but hate what I post. So they're talking to me about this, and I explained that the reason why there's not a lot of comments is because I don't have a lot of fans that post SpongeBob images or stupid memes that get a lot of likes. And I explained this in pretty calm, civil language, and they are like, "Oh, you're butthurt. You buy your likes," and one of those gotcha kind of arguments. And the best way to deal with them is to not deal with them, because they're going to say whatever they're going to say about you. There's no real point in convincing them otherwise, or else it looks like you're trying to disprove something that might be true. And like Jack asked, why aren't these things taught? I explained that earlier, but this is what you have to deal with, the end result of the fact that nobody really knows how to use reason or logic. This is why I think that you should argue with people who are a little more close to what you believe rather than completely opposite of what you believe, because you can get further with them because you know that you basically believe everything that they do and that you have that mutual level of respect. But and you can also have a conversation and an honest debate without really having to resort to these tactics of stupid arguments. I said last episode that I mostly get questions from a bunch of different people with the same names as one another, but even if I've answered one of your questions before, feel free to keep sending them in. I don't mind having regulars, so this is another one from a regular, Clarence. I answered a question from Clarence last episode. What stance do you take on animal testing, hunting, and the general debate concerning their rights? I would like to first talk about the hunting aspect of your question, because a lot of people have this misconception about what hunting does. And a lot of people, they think that hunting, when people go hunting and they take home the animals that they kill, they're creating a deficit of animals, when really that's not the case. They pay licensing fees, which go towards preserving these animal populations while giving a return to the humans. So it goes both ways. We get the meat from the animals, and the animal population can continue to grow. For example, the white rhino population was at 50 in 1900, I believe. And there's a site called Rhino Economics that explains all this stuff. And yeah, now the white rhino population is at 20,000 because of efforts of conservationists. And most hunters are conservationists, because if there's no effort to conserve a species, then there's no species to hunt. So it would really be against their best interest to poach these animals indiscriminately. Massive amounts of poaching is what happens when there is a void of a legal infrastructure in which to operate. If you prohibit hunting, you're just going to drive the trade for, say, rhino horns underground. And usually people who operate within the legal system of hunting, getting licensed, and going on a reservation to hunt, they have more of a respect for the animal population, whereas poachers don't. They're just looking to make a quick buck, and they don't have any interest in leaving these creatures there for future generations. I get that to the average person, the pictures of that, girl from Texas or wherever she's from, having a dead lion in her hands looks bad because you think, oh God, they're extinct or they're going extinct, they're endangered. Why is she doing killing them? She's on a reservation where they exist and they're actually in a controlled environment where they're allowed to breed and there's a net growth to the lion population. So yeah, you can't, some things you can't go with the knee jerk reaction because it's wrong. So anti hunting people, the arguments they use, that's a pet peeve of mine, but I'm not a hunter myself. I didn't grow up in that kind of world, but I definitely have a lot of respect for the people that do it because they do a lot of good for the world. With regard to animal testing, I think we should keep it to rats because rats are gross and disgusting, are really only worth what science can do with them. And with regard to things like factory farming, I have some issue with how that goes. And I get the argument that the Greenpeace PETA people type make with the chickens in the cages, but I don't like chickens very much either. With pigs, I can understand because they're pretty intelligent creatures, but chickens, again, I see them as lab rats. I think the only animal that should be afforded any rights, the elephant. They're a really intelligent species. They're the only ones with that have a base level of civilization and that they actually bury and mourn their dead. Creatures that are intelligent, I think we should treat with more respect, but I'm no animal rights activist myself. I like meat and will continue to do so. Just not elephant meat. I think that question went pretty well, so let's do another. This one's from Sean. I've listened to the last two podcasts and been lurking this community. Do you think this community will eventually impact society in a positive way or negatively? Personally, I believe it would be generally beneficial, and the part about it impacting society seems most likely at some point in time. And not answering this question, just explaining to you that this community is a collection of Facebook pages that generally have the same sense of humor. So, again, most of you are probably here because of that. So, just in the off chance that you're here by other means, there you go. That's what this question is referring to. As for the question, I think that we're here pretty much in our own self-contained environment. I've done Google searches for other pages, and it's not like these people are going on forums and talking about the pages. We kind of exist in isolation, so it would be pretty amazing if we started breaching into the mainstream a little bit more. But from what I've seen, I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. The fact that there are people like yourself who believe in it, though, where there's one, there's many. So who knows? Maybe we are having an invisible impact on people that really won't ever be seen until much further down the line. And even if it's in a small part of America or the world, I think that would be pretty cool if people took what we do to heart and applied it to their everyday lives. I think that because most of us are confined to Facebook pages, we don't go to conventions, for example, and we don't do many public speaking engagements, if any. I've thrown around this idea where we have a page convention where all the admins of the famous Facebook pages get together, but with that DashCon, I don't think that would be a very good idea. DashCon was just an unmitigated disaster. So maybe a convention would not be the best way to go because that attracts losers and weirdos. Maybe if we went out on tour or something and did public speaking engagements at local universities, that would be cool. Or even maybe just something as small as a meetup. That way we could start getting out into reality and having an impact out there. But just on Facebook, I'm not optimistic that we're getting our message out, whatever that may be, to a broader audience. We're on the subject of pages, so let's keep going with the page questions. This one comes from Shay. Shay writes, "Hey there again. I wanted to thank you for featuring my question in your podcast. This time around, I would like to ask your opinion on page community interaction. I know you folks sometimes love movie and DJ join ups and stuff like that, and other pages like Humanity 3 asking things like what they ate for lunch, how they are doing, weather, etc. It's turned into a bit of a joke among pages, but how do you feel about it? Do you believe that it enhances the page experience among fans? Has your page found success in it in any way, or is it just a fad?" Creating a meta environment for your page and for fans of your page is really important because it fosters a sense of community which will allow you to uh, continue on as long as Facebook will allow you to. Because I've seen pages they interact with other people and through by very limited means, and by that I mean any page they share, they would say like, "Oh, we'll share your page for $5 or whatever. PayPal me $5." I've seen this before, and they don't realize that what they're doing is basically stealing other people's content and you know and charging for it. And I just think that's stupid because you're alienating a lot of people who would keep you, what you're doing alive and keeping you what they would keep you relevant. So I think that it's not a fad in terms of just interacting with people on a human level. That interactivity with the people who are loyal to you is what's going to keep you alive and what you do alive for the years to come. And this applies beyond just Facebook pages, which are here today, gone tomorrow, let's face it. I doubt many of us will still be doing it in 5 years' time. But some of us might have websites and some of us might have blogs that we should take the same concept. We should all promote each other's work and help each other out in any way we can. And help our readers out as well, offering them content that they like and offering up content that other people like, our peers. So, yeah, I think you can apply that philosophy to just beyond what Facebook allows. As far as Facebook fame being a fad, yeah, I think that's a fad, but just being nice with people and interacting with people, I think, is something that will never go out of style. And that people enjoy receiving a basic level of human kindness. Let's answer something a little more serious. This one comes from Kellen. Two questions, actually. The first question from Kellen says, "How do you feel about the U.S. profiting off of college students when higher education in many other countries is free?" I know at least in California up until a certain point that tuition at California state universities were free. And there's a difference between University of California and California state universities, but if you went to the state school, it was actually free tuition. All you had to pay for was books and on-campus housing if you chose to go that path. So it wasn't too long ago that we had free education ourselves, at least in some places. Why people are profiting off of it is because there's this huge demand for college and going to college and student loans because parents don't save enough money for their kids so that they don't go into debt or whatever. And yeah, so it's basically just the market responding to a surplus of demand because we discourage our young people from going into the trades. We think that they have to go to a 4 year institution and get a job where once upon graduation where they don't have to use their hands or any form of labor that uses their body. I talked about this in one of the previous podcasts that I think a lot of our problems have to do with our avoidance of manual labor. I think in order for free tuition to be possible, you need to have a very small, at least not a massive society like we have now, or you heavily tax your citizens, which is what a lot of these European countries that offer free college do. From a technical standpoint, it can't be free because somebody's paying for it. Somebody's paying the salary of the faculty, of the administration, and so on. I think that if colleges limited their course offerings to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that the demand for college would increase and that there would be that free tuition or at least cheaper tuition would definitely be more possible. As it stands, you have a lot of mediocre people being encouraged by their teachers and anybody else in the public school system to go to college because the more people that go to college, the more money they get. And like I said before in the previous question, these people just want your money. They don't really have your best interest at heart. If they did, they'd tell these kids who aren't really that special to go into the trades. The student loan industry is based off of giving out loans to kids that are studying something stupid and that don't really come from intelligent or wealthy families. And these kids are going into really stupid degrees that won't get them a great salary upon graduation. College is now exploited for profit now more than ever in America because you have a huge population of people that shouldn't be in college going to college. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope that steers some of you younger people listening away from being an anthropologist or some nonsense like that. Just if you can't go pro in something that people want, just learn how to be a mechanic, learn how to be a plumber, and you'll be a lot happier for it. Kellen sent in this second question, and it reads like this: what are your thoughts on the victimist ideology that so many minorities use today to perpetuate the state that they are in? If you agree that this is true, do you feel that by and large the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s has failed? I think the civil rights movement has failed just for the fact that the further we get away from slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, the worse off they seem to be. I noticed that a lot of black people, their highest aspiration is to either be an athlete or an entertainer. And certainly there's nothing wrong with aspiring to those things, but you should aspire first to be something considered below that, because your likelihood of becoming a great wide receiver in the NFL or a great rapper or a musician, it's really, really low. The odds of becoming a mechanic or a plumber versus a professional athlete or a professional musician or entertainer, it's certainly a lot more achievable. It's just a matter of putting in the hours, whereas the other ones are a matter of outperforming the competition or getting somebody to notice you above anybody else. And as for their victimist ideology that they subscribe to, a lot of it has to do with the fact that academia, media, and even the president are always constantly in your ear saying that oppressive white people are to blame, and even white people themselves. So I believe that if a lot of us were to say, no, it's not our fault, it's your fault, they would step down from that victim complex. I mean, this is an incredibly complicated question that would probably be better suited to a conversation rather than me talking and answering a question. And it's certainly not made any less complex by the people who say that you can't bring in factors of IQ, cultural incompatibility, and genetics into what would be the solution for this. So instead of acknowledging differences between people, we just say that one did somebody else wrong when you have a lot of people doing their own people wrong. And human cruelty is just a part of history, and you can't get away from that. And to say that one group has exclusively oppressed another, it's you're just being intellectually dishonest. Especially when you have a lot of human slavery going on today in modern Africa, free of any European influence. this doesn't come as a reaction to any particular question, but I got some questions about what's happening in Israel and Russia and other current event type things. And I could talk about those things, but I don't want to because I was listening to something recently that was released last year, and they were talking about North Korea and how everybody thought they were going to blow up South Korea and then aim their missiles at Hawaii or whatever it was, and it turned out to be nothing. So I don't want to make mountains out of molehills because, with regard to the situation in Israel, they do this every year or two. I think the last time they were doing what they're doing now was back in November 2012. So they do this, and it's just what happens over there. And I don't want to make too much of it or look too much into it when I don't know all the facts yet. I remember about 10 years ago when the anti-war fervor was at an all-time high with respect to what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you had a lot of popular culture that focused on it. And they were bitching about the war and George Bush. And you don't remember any of it. I certainly don't remember it. It doesn't stay with me on a daily basis. And that's what I view this as. It's not something that I want to be a relic of a certain period of time. And who knows, maybe it will. Maybe these things I talk about on a weekly basis will pass in given enough time, but just I remember back, like I said, about the anti-war pop culture, and it all came off as very insincere, and that's why I think we don't remember or talk about it to this day, is because it didn't spring out of any folk culture. It was just some people looking to make money off of current trends that were happening in American culture. And in fact, there's probably not a lot of anti-war war commentary culture that we still talk about. I mean, there's some stuff from Vietnam and World War II, I'm sure, but it's very, very minuscule. It's a very small percentage of what came out of that time that we still remember. So that's why I don't talk about the news on things that I create and release and have the intention of keeping up for a long period of time. I know this one is leaving me open for doomball jokes, but do you believe it is possible to stop the massive wave of degeneracy that has spread across Western civilization for the past few decades? Or do you believe that things must truly get worse before they get better? Do you think enough people will put their fists down and get more realistic on contemporary issues? Or do you believe, to use a classic expression, that shit must hit the fan so that society can then begin anew? Sam sent in that question. As I talked about on the last episode, I look at a lot of this stuff, the direct product of current Western civilization's decadence and deviancy. It's more how people react to it, everyday people, their reactions to what is put in front of them. And they either react with disgust, or they react with excuses, or they throw their hands up and say, well, what's wrong with that? I find it very disturbing that a lot of people, they make excuses for certain things so strongly associated with certain lifestyles that either they themselves engage in or sympathize with. I think shit already has hit the fan based on what I've seen. The fact that we tolerate all this deviancy and degeneracy is really alarming. I mean, it's another thing for people to make excuses for certain lifestyles when I'm posting gay incest fan fiction on Tumblristas or whatever. But just in smaller everyday ways, like 50% divorce rate and the fact that our military now allows women in combat roles. Just small things like that are why I think, in addition to the worst stuff, that's why I think things have hit the fan already. So at a certain point, you have to say, what will people consider shit hitting the fan? What will make people go in the opposite direction that they've been going? What will make the pendulum swing back the other way? And I don't think it ever will. I think we're on the endless downward slide until God decides to put an end to all of it, and who knows when that will be. As I said last episode, there are people who are good and decent individuals, but we have to judge societal trends, cultural trends, based on what the average is doing. And I just think the average person is generally just a shithead. I mean, I'm sure that you're a good person, and I certainly believe probably a lot of the stuff that you believe and a lot of the stuff that you don't like. I also don't like, but we're just two people. I used to be of the opinion that we needed to make things really worse. We need to basically turn everything into a war zone and expose and bring out into the light these terrible things. But I've been doing that for the last year and it's just not working. I mean, people like this filth and this disgusting shit that they're looking at. And people, like I said, people are making excuses for it, for the inexcusable. So, what can we do? I think we have to live the life that really speaks and reflects well upon us. We can do that by getting involved in our communities, going to church. For the men out there, I recommend aligning with other men at your local church and figuring out who's aware of what's going on and start aligning with them and just to start forming communities based around shared values and beliefs. Once you do get out there into the real world, show people that what you're doing is the correct way and that what the rest of the world is doing just is it'll end in death and misery. It's not enough to show people what's going on out there. You have to be a counterpoint to all of that as well. And I'm not saying don't do it, and I certainly am not going to stop, but there needs to be a counterpoint. And we have to be living examples of that. I am not at all optimistic about the future of Western civilization, but if you want to know what to do about it, just be a good example to your community and to your people because that's about the only thing you can do. Blake wants to know, do you think any sort of anarchism can promote a stronger human species, or at least a revision of morals to make a group stronger, slowly but surely letting social evolution kill off the weak? I certainly have a lot of sympathy towards self government in that not everybody acts as their own individual, but they are part of a smaller tribe or community, and everybody has a significant say in what goes on. And I think that leads to stronger people. It's when you get massive societies like what we have in America that you end up seeing dysgenic breeding, as I've talked about. Because in smaller settings, you can decide who comes in and who you want to leave. Whereas in a massive society like ours, you don't have that level of control, so you have a lot of undesirables coming into it. It's ironic that the larger the society, the more chaotic the society, the more centralized the control is. And the more centralized the control is, the less control that we have as individuals over what happens to the culture in which we live. From a pure Darwinistic perspective, we would get a lot stronger if we just said, fuck it, we're not doing any law enforcement, there will be no rules enforced, you're on your own. And you'd see a lot of strong people emerge from that, but you'd also see a lot of middling people that civilization allows to exist and should allow to exist. They would die off, and of course, the weak who we don't want around would die off as well. So, if by anarchism we're talking about small tribal groups that have no outside influence, they're self governing, I definitely would like to see a return to that. We just need to see a radical descaling of society. And that can't happen without a breakup of America. Think back to colonial Europe. Europe was and still is split up into many smaller kingdoms that are all competing against each other, and they accomplished a lot more than if they were unified. America had a chance early on to break up into different entities, but Abraham Lincoln, for whatever arbitrary reasons he thought the Union needed to be preserved, that's what ended up happening. You need competition in order to improve, or else you either stagnate or you see entropy. And that's what's happening. And I think that if we had broken up into separate entities back during the Civil War, we wouldn't see the problems that we're seeing now. That's all I've got to say on that subject, so we'll go to the next question. Jamie asks, do you think there is any merit in being an artist for a living? Also, if you could have a pet, which one would be your favorite? Well, I have a cat. I mentioned that an episode or two ago. I think it was the first episode. I also have dogs, so I like cats and dogs. I don't like any of the exotic creatures. I mean, I like them, but I wouldn't want them as pets. At one point in my life, I would have considered myself an artist. I've been playing guitar for almost 10 years, and I got really involved with that for a while, but it never got me any money. So if you can do the artist thing for a living, I respect that a lot. But I have some advice as to how to go about that. My first piece of advice would to avoid art school. Just don't do it. It's a waste of time, and it'll suck all the joy that you have out of it. And all you're really doing is being taught how to study other people. It's not as if they're teaching you how to be original or the path you take to originality. Do the artistic thing while you're doing something. You're either working a job or going to school for something that's actually worthwhile and will get you a decent job at some point. And while you're doing these other things, in your free time, do the artistic thing. Make some phone calls, try to get on the college radio show or whatever. Play shows on the weekend, do go to open mics, and if you do enough of that stuff, you'll eventually build up momentum to where you can get paid a little bit, and that little bit might turn into a lot. Just do this stuff while you have a lot of energy, while you're young and you still have your natural enthusiasm, because that'll go away. You'll get jaded about shit, and then all momentum will be lost. So hustle. You gotta get into a community of people where you'll start paying for each other's work and you'll get each other jobs doing whatever artistic endeavor you're embarking upon. The absolute worst thing you can do is just make something, release it, and just wait for people to discover it. You have to get everybody involved that you possibly can and let the word spread from there. Because if you're just waiting around for somebody to discover you or whatever the hell they call it, it's just not going to happen. I know it's hard for a lot of us now, but you really have to be a social butterfly in order to succeed at any level doing artistic work. So in that time you're not creating anything or you're not working, start sending emails, start showing your work to people, start making friends and see where it goes from there. Just don't abandon everything and say I'm going to focus on my art because in my experience I've seen a lot of people do that and it just never works out for them. Next question. What do you personally think can be done to prevent mass shootings in America? This question comes from Frankie. Look up SSRIs and mass shootings in your search engine of choice, and you will see the answer. There was one website that had a database from 1988 to 2011. They stopped updating then, of just hundreds, maybe even thousands of violent acts linked with antidepressant usage. It's funny that a lot of mass shootings happen at schools because a lot of these schools are the ones that encourage parents to put their children on these drugs. So, as far as I'm concerned, the teachers and administrations of schools that perpetuate the use of antidepressants are getting what they deserve. If we wanted to stop mass shootings, we would put armed guards in schools, but apparently pacifism is associated with high-mindedness. I think it's the complete opposite, but what do I know? I don't teach fifth graders. So, just in a well-armed populace, I think that if everybody had guns, people would behave. No one wants to actually get anything done. if feminists were really serious about ending this rape culture or whatever, they would carry around guns with them and shoot their supposed rapists, but they just want something to bitch about. If we had a dueling culture, we'd also see more well behaved individuals that, if, say some guy, oh, baby, I love you so much to some dude's daughter, and that guy pumps and dumps it, he'd have his whole family and the girl's whole family coming after him and beating his ass or killing him. Too many people out there are walking around acting as if you can do whatever the fuck you want and there will be no consequences for it. I think that if ordinary people were willing to do ordinary violence, civilization would be a lot better. But I'm not smart, I don't teach children and hang out with children all day. So pacifism is the way to go, because if somebody were harming my family, I would just stand back. There's nothing I can do about it. There are people out there that think this. There are people out there who have said what I just said, that they could never do any harm to anybody because harm is always wrong. I'm sorry, but if somebody's fucking raping your wife and beating your children, or home invasion, whatever, you need to fuck that person up. I don't give a shit if you're a pacifist. Bunch of fucking pussies. This is what happens when you let women be in charge of shit. But I digress. Let's go to the next question. This question comes from Joe. Were you raised a traditionalist conservative type, or did Poll and other sources like it shape your political views? Oh, and another one. Who are your heroes, living or dead, and why? As for the second question, I had Peter sent in a similar question to that. Who are some of my biggest influences? He sent in another question, which I'll get around to next. But the answer for who are my biggest influences and who are my heroes, it's the same answer. I would call them influences rather than heroes. I don't believe in heroes, so there are people who have influenced what I do, my worldview. As far as politics goes, the writings of Pat Buchanan had a pretty big influence on me. And for a more contemporary guy, I really like Ramsey Paul. I think we agree on a lot of things. And those are about as far as my influences go with regard to what I do. And I'm more influenced by peers, to be honest with you. There are people in my life who I respect, who I won't name, but I think they know who they are, and they've been very good friends to me. So just regular people have influenced me far more than famous people have. As for whether I was raised in a traditional home or if 4chan's politically incorrect had an influence on me, my development actually predates the existence of that particular board on 4chan. It was about in early 2008 when I started to, because I was into libertarianism and all that, and I fell in with a group of people where they discussed these things. They were by the book racist or sexist or whatever you want to call them, and I thought they were incredibly funny and truthful. And that's when I started distancing myself from social liberalism. And a little bit later than that, I started distancing myself from the idea that the market is always right. And that I saw that economic liberalism, free trade, uh, fulfilled the destinies of Marxist ends, which just really disturbed me. So I'm basically inverted of how I was like 7 years ago. And I've been, I was more moderate back then probably, but that's my development in a very short period of time. With the advent of Poll, it seems like there are a lot of other people my age who underwent a similar development to me, being exposed to different ideas and synthesizing all this information. So once we do process all the information and come to the certain conclusions, there are a lot of people out there with the same conclusion, and I think that's why politically incorrect ultimately was created. And as for my upbringing, I guess you could say I grew up in a conservative household. both parents are registered Republicans, but they weren't really too political, you know. I think you should keep kids pretty far away from politics, or else they'll start rebelling against you in the opposite way. And I didn't have that too much, you know. I had some normal teenage rebellion, but nothing too major. And I'm not a Republican myself. I think that they're disgustingly liberal, but again, I don't really view problems through the political context like I used to. I think that if you want your kids to grow up having a reasonable worldview, um, yeah, like I said, keep them away from politics, and just teach them the importance of family and loyalty, and they should form a reasonable worldview if they recognize the importance of those things. Give your opinion on transhumanism, maybe on the disgusting slave conditioning of the human race. What do you think will happen in the next century and beyond? Who are the biggest world players or the powers that be? And what is in their agenda? Extraterrestrial contact? Auras? Yeah, stuff like that. It's not my territory, but I do have a little bit to say about the powers that be. I mentioned the last episode about who I think our elites are and who they actually are. There's no real debating that, but they wouldn't be so powerful if people weren't so weak, and that's ultimately what I think is the problem, that human nature is very frail, weak, and imperfect, and we allow people to seize power over us. I think unless something changes in the next century, the complete documentation of all human life and activity and the complete regulation of it, everything digitized, everything centralized, that's where I think we're going. We're going to get to the point where our bank account information is implanted in our skin, and if we at all disagree with the means and ends of global capitalism and cultural Marxism, they'll just shut it off, and they'll shut us off out from our money and everybody we know. That's about as Alex Jones InfoWars as I'll get, because all that stuff is a guess, you know. It's just a general feeling as to where we're going with regard to our elites and the plans they have for us. But I very well could be wrong. It's not something that that's not where I put my convictions. Conspiracy theories can be debunked and or proven right over time, but human nature is always pretty predictable. There's no conspiracy there, and that's where my focus is. For those of you that have listened this long, thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate it. And if you want to be a part of the show, send me anything. Send me questions, send me music, send me artwork, anything, and I'll include it. If you want to get in on the next show, send me your whatever you want to send me Tuesday through Sunday. Then you'll get in that week's episode. After that, you'll get in next week's episode. So I put everything, no matter when anybody sends me, in a backlog. So I do my best so nothing gets lost. Anyway, here's another question. This one's from Joshua. Do you feel it is appropriate for women to have the ability to be topless in public? No, just for the simple fact that any woman who would want to go topless in public is some chick whose tits you don't want to see anyway. And of course these skanks are saying like, oh, men can be topless. Well, what makes you think I want to see some dude's bitch tits while he's out fucking mowing his lawn or something? Good-looking women don't need to go topless because they can get a man just with how they look in their everyday dress. It's these fucking horribly ugly women that want to go topless. So I don't think I need to explain that any further. Faith asked me, why are you against revealing your personal identity on your page? This is also simple. I'm not a very interesting person, and I'm not against revealing who I am on any platform per se, but it's just people don't need to know. My identity is pretty separate from everything that I do. And I have made friends through the pages on Facebook and Plug DJ and whatever. So, I mean, if you want to be my friend, hey, let's be friends. I don't really have any interesting secrets, so if you want to swap secrets, find somebody more interesting to do that with. And with that, I think I'm officially out of things to talk about for this week. As always, thank you for listening, those of you that have listened this far, and keep sending in everything you want to send me because chances are I'll include it. And let's get into the credits for this episode. Introduction music by Based 404. Interlude music by Sol Tyrannus, Hagbard, and the butt-munching scum Ravenge. Ending music by Contrast 03. Full versions of every song featured on this episode can be found in the links below.